Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Brachas Perek Ches, Halacha Beis, and God willing, starting Halacha Gimel. We are going to be learning today Daf Pei Amid Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, in the beginning of the line Shmuel Salak Legabe Rav. We are in the middle of the sugya of Netilas Yodoyim. We're going to learn here the Svara that Netilas Yadayim is only mandatory for those who eat cholim, in other words, for non-kohanim, but kohanim may choose to keep their hands covered, when they eat, that suffices, and they don't have to wash their hands. It would mean that those who are oichlei truma, because there's a reason, obviously touching food without netilas yadayim, without a mappa, without something intervening between your hand, interposing between your hand and the food, that is something that's prohibited for all. But we'll see to what point must you wash your hands and the various opinions. We're going to learn how much of the hand has to be washed. We're going to learn for what must you wash your hands. I know nowadays we wash our hands only when we eat bread. We'll see bread, produce that's wet. One opinion is very machmer, even produce that's not wet, as we will see. And finally, in the sugya of Netilas Yadayim, stam Yadayim askani yosei. Masha'enkein, we'll see in the Gemara an opinion that if you do proper Netilas Yadayim for a meal in the morning, and when you wash your hands, you stipulate, you say that I am washing my hands for the whole day, and you keep your mind on your hands throughout the day, even after you finish breakfast and after you benched, will be one opinion that holds, then you won't have to wash your hands when you have your su'ud in the evening. Because you washed in the morning, you made it tonight, you had in mind, stam yadayim askanis. But if it's not stam yadayim, with kavana, we trust that you indeed did not touch anything that would soil your hands, that by the kahanim would make the truma or the kachim repugnant. And we're going to conclude this whole topic with a story of a su'udas hoida'ah that was made by Rabbi for Rab Ze'eda, as we'll speak out, when he recovered from a deathly illness, and the rule that we will see that whoever led the Hamaitzi should be the one leading the benching, and that will conclude this halacha base. Now we're going to start today halacha gimel, the third mission in this chapter. This chapter is all about Beishamai and Beisilol and Hilchai Seuda. In this mission, there's going to be a dispute whether the towel that you use to dry the hands after you made Netilas Yadayim, where would you place it? In those days, they had no napkins. I'm assuming in those days, there was very little cutlery. So during the meal, when the hands got soiled, they needed a mappa, they needed a towel to clean themselves. They would like to use the same towel that they used for Netilas Yadayim. And we'll see a machlekes Beishamai and Beisilol in our Mishnah, whether the towel should be placed on the table, whether the towel should be placed on the keses, on the pillow that people use when they would lean. We will see why here, why there, why not here, why not there. And as the time will progress, actually there's a beautiful machlokes between the Bavli in the Yerushalmi, in the Pshat, in the Mishnah. We will minimally, God willing, today speak out the way the Bavli understands the dispute. And then we'll introduce and show how the Yerushalmi has a different understanding of this machlokes. Guys, without any further ado, again on Daf Pei Amid Beis, the beginning of the line, the beginning of the 6th line before the bottom of the Amid, Shmuel. Says the Gemara, Shmuel Salak Legabe Rav. Shmuel went to visit Rav. Now, we do know that Rav was the big leader of the yeshiva in Surah. That means Rav lived the latter part of his life in Bavel. On the other hand, Rav, not only that, Rav was born in Bavel, in current day, I think, Iran. I think we know exactly what city Rav was born in. But as we also know, Rav went to Eretz Yisrael to learn over there for many years. And this story happened when Rav was in Eretz Yisrael. So that's the Shmuel Salak. He went up right? Eretz Yisrael, you always go up to visit Rav. And Chama Shmuel saw that Yosef, that Rav was sitting, and Ochel Kahasam, and he was eating as there. Whenever the Yerushalmi writes there means Babel. Even though Shmuel is from Babel, the story is recorded in Eretz Yisrael. And as the Rash Shadilio writes that people in Chutz La'aretz were not that makbid as they should have been to wash their hands before they ate bread. It's not that, God forbid, they didn't wash their hands and they still ate bread. They would cover their hands with a mappa. They would put a glove on. They would grab on to a napkin to make sure that since they didn't wash netilas yadayim, they're not going to touch the bread. But that was something that they used to do in Babel. They were very lenient. That's not a compliment. As we'll see, actually, there's a machlokes whether that's allowed or not. Shmuel held it's not allowed. Shmuel was bothered that people were lenient in Babel, and he was shocked to see that Rav, who's not a kohen, when he was eating bread, he saw that he was wearing a glove. He was wearing a map, and he presumed that he's wearing a glove because he didn't wash netilas yadayim. So Amalei, so Shmuel tells Rav, Mahu chein, what's idas? What are you doing? In other words, you're only wearing a mappa. So says the Gemara Amalei, to which Rav tells Shmuel, you got it wrong. I washed my hands l'netilas yadayim. I, like you, are of the opinion that everyone has to wash the netilas yadayim. In addition, I'm wearing a mappa. Why? Because istanis ani. I'm a delicate person. There was no cutlery. So even though he washed netilas yadayim, and let's quickly review the ikar reason why they made the takana for netilas yadayim. Why did they say shtam yadayim shniyos over there in Shabbos, beginning in the Sugya Yud Gimel Amud Beis? This is actually in Shabbos Daf Yud Daled, is because stam yadayim askani yosein before Tum and Tara, which means that people's hands are touching things that are not that clean. And truma is holy, kachim is holy. If a kohen were to eat truma and kachim without washing his hands, begashmias, that's how it began, then they might soil physically the food, making it repugnant, and then no one would eat it. That's how it began. So then they made a takana. You have to, you're yadayim ashniyas. You're going to make truma into a shlishi. Shlishi could become a puzzle, can become a shlishi. So they have to wash their hands. Then they went on to say that mishum serach truma, for people to get into the routine that you wash your hands for truma, even when the kohen eats non-truma. So what if chulin gets it doesn't matter. I mean, I know there's baltashkas. Okay, so you throw it away. Even there. And then even a Yisrael should wash his hands. Everyone should be habituated in washing their hands, all for the kohen and the eye. There's no truma right now. Mashiach is coming. There's going to be truma. It's one of the things that we do now in order for us to be in the habit. So when Mashiach comes, when these things go back to the way they have to be, people are already in the habit. So just going back. So Rab would wash his hands. On top of that, he didn't want to soil his hands. So therefore, he would wear a mappa, he would wear a glove, not to get his hands dirty. Clearly, we see from our Gemara that both Rav and Shmuel are of the opinion that you can't rely on the mappa. Hello, guys, we learned Friday. If you're traveling and you have no water, and the water ahead of you is more than 4 mil, or according to the Yerushalmi, it's behind you, then you put a mappa. Everyone holds that if there is no water, you can do it. We're speaking about a scenario like now, today, we have water everywhere. Some people think, I'm not going to touch the bread. Today I have tinfoil. I'm going to hold the sandwich. That's what we're speaking about. Rav and Shmuel held that's not correct to be lenient. However, let's go by Rab Zeira, Katzalik Lahache, when he came over here, meaning when he came to Eretz Yisrael, that we already learned in the Yerushalmi, how the Rab Zeira went up, he saw Kohanim were eating. Like they ate in Babel again without washing their hands, they just used a mappa. These kohanim is referring to, says the Rashirilio, Rav Ami and Abasi, as we know from Bavli. And here we'll actually see that maybe kohanim can be lenient. That's a machlokes. So Amar Lohain again, Abseida told him, hey, Hava Azilna Lahi that Rav Shmuel, I know what happened between Rav and Shmuel. I know that even Rav that used to wear a mappa, that was separate. That's because he didn't want to touch the food. Today we have cutlery. He didn't have cutlery. But everyone holds that you have to wash your hands. Lechatchila relying on a mappa, I'm simply not going to touch the food, is not okay. Okay. So says the Gemara that Asa Rabbi Yosi Bar Kahana, Rabbi Yosi, the grandson of Bar Kahana, said in the name of Shmuel, and he said it not because Rab Ze'eda did not know how to defend himself. So says that Asherilio, he responded even before Rav Ami and Avasi. Rav Ami and Avasi were eating. Rab Ze'eda criticized them. How can you do it? So before they had a chance to respond, Rabbi Yossi jumped in for them. And he told him, and I want you to know that there is an opinion that Netilas Yodayim, these are the words, that the obligation of washing the hands, the statement that you cannot rely on a mappa, only if there's no water, that's only l'chulin. And l'chulin doesn't mean chulin. Chulin means the people who are chulin eaters, which means to non-kohanim. Non-kohanim, you're right, and Rav is not a kohen. If you have water, you have to do netilas yadayim. Turning to daf peyal of today's daf. But a netilas the truma means lo oichle truma. People that eat truma, whether they're eating truma or not, that they hold that they can be lenient. They are more careful, and they have either or. They can wash their hands or they can use a mappa. So indeed, there is a shita that holds that kohanim lechatchila can use the mappa. Gavaldik. Now, the Gemara wants you to know that not everyone agrees with that. That Rabbi Yossi Yoimer letruma ulachol, and that was probably the shita. Well, not probably, because Rabbi is not a kohen. So we end up with this Gavaldik machlokes whether kohanim. Ironically, the whole thing was for kohanim not to ruin the truma. Maybe the kohanim can be more lenient, says the Gemara. Moving on. Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Chia Barash, and Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Chia Barash in the name of Rav. Let's go. Another sugya we have in the Bible. We say netilas yadayim until where? Until where? So he said netilas yadayim letruma adapedek. If you're eating truma, here truma means truma, not oichle truma, then you have to wash your hands until the pedek. Until the pedek. If you remember, guys, we learned this good in the Bible. Pedek here means the wrist. Wrist. You have to wash all the way to the wrist. But if you're having chulin, and don't forget, you're washing your hands l'chulin only srach truma. So for that, at kishri etzba oisav, it's enough until the knuckles, which are at the end of your fingers, because in the knuckles we also have different shitas. There's knuckles in middle. Remember that whole topic? And by the way, nowadays, Tisha B'Av, it's almost say lahavdil, and Yom Kippur we talk only wash until the sidaim at kishri etzba oisav. Here we're speaking about food, right? But it's very much related to this topic. In other words, when you eat truma, you have to wash more of your hands. However, miyasha, Miyasha, the son of Shimon Levi, says that man tahava achalim savei, whoever was eating with my zayda, whoever, and no matter what he was eating, and he wouldn't wash his hands until his wrist. If he would be lenient, if he would only wash his hands the way some people in the kal would just wash their hands until their knuckles, then you know what happens? He wouldn't eat with them. Gavaldik. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. I mean, that's how it worked. Mishoy, 4 lines from the top. Mishoy oichel im zekeni. Whoever with the zayd Rabbi Shua ben Levi. We have enough liyad alapeder. Didn't want to eat with him. He's adding a word. He didn't want to eat with him. I'll tell you what he means. Because sometimes when people are sitting around your table, right? Imagine you made kiddush. What are you going to do? You have one table, and this guy only washed his hands until the knuckles. What does it mean he didn't eat with him? He kicked him out. So Pnei Moshe is saying that he didn't want to eat with him. He never invited him back. He's just adding that nuance. He didn't shame him. He didn't kick him out, but he didn't want to eat with him. In other words, we don't accept this difference between truma or chulin. Whoever had the merit saw Rabbi Reichik, senior, wash his hands. That was something to watch. Mamash V'Yamalach. Took him a long time. The carefulness that he had, that everything should be drying, and his hand should be drying, the water should be thrown 3 times, and all the way until it was unbelievable. I'll tell you more than that. I had the merit to dorm with him. I know it sounds funny, for many years. I think for 4 years or for 3 years. And like he came to fundraise in Brazil, and he would sleep in my bedroom. I was a boy. And every time he woke up in the middle of the night to relieve himself, and sometimes it was a couple of times, he would wash Negelwasser. And the Negelwasser by his bed was the same way. So he spent half of his night saying Krishma Shalamita, and the other half of the night washing Negelwasser. Can I tell you? That's what I remember him. Okay, says the Gemara right. Now, for what are you washing your hands? Weiter am Achleikus. Rav Huna Amar, Ein netilas yadayim ela possible vat dafka, and going beyond that is arrogance. However, and by the way, that's how we do it. The staple diet is bread. We're not speaking about kohanim. Kohanim have to wash their hands for all truma. The reason is they don't want to make the truma or the kachim repugnant. But if you're having chulin and it's only called again sirach truma to be in the routine, people should know only when you eat a meal. However, tani rab oishaya, no more than that. Not only for bread, cold, anything that is wet with liquid. Don't forget, guys, once the Chazal said, Stam Yadai Mashniyos, what did we learn last week? We learned the good rules. Which means, Asheni, if it touches mashkin, it makes the mashkin into a rishon. And a rishon can even make chulin tameh. It's not that it's usher to eat chulin tameh. It's not. But why would you do that? And then you become tameh when you eat a certain amount of chulin. So if the food is wet, which is, by the way, what we do by the karpas, you also wash your hands. Not only for bread. And now the most common opinion is that Rabbi say, Amar afilo mekatseitz turumoisen. Even if a person, mekatseitz means it's chewing turumoisen, this the bean. And as the Haredim points out, obviously this bean is speaking about a dry bean, because if this bean is moist, he's not adding anything. He holds, even over there, is havanat al yada, he would wash his hands. In other words, you have three opinions. One shita holds that no matter what you eat, they would wash their hands. Like a kohen who's eating truma, no matter what the truma is, even if it's only truma midrabanan. Guys, vegetables can only be midrabanan. So what? By kohanim truma, they would wash their hands for everything. Stam yadayim askanias. You don't want to make it repugnant. Truma you're not allowed to throw out. It's holy. Even if it becomes tamim midrabanan, you can't even burn it. You have to wait until it becomes nifsal tzurasik. Okay. The only leniency we learned today was huge, is that if they're using a glove or a mappa, they could be a one sheet. No, the whole thing about the mappa is they don't have to wash. That was the big thing. Let's go back. Because it makes sense, because they understand the severity of it. They're eating mamash. And by the way, it's not only when they eat truma. The Haredim says means lo oichli truma. Let's go back. Let's go further. Rav Omar. Now we spoke this out on the intro. Big chiddush that if a person not al yadav v'shachris, we're speaking about shachris. We're not talking about negel vaser. We're speaking about a meal. They ate a meal twice a day, and when he washed his hand shachris, I'm reading inside the Charedim vehisna. He verbally stipulated. He said, "I am washing my hands for the whole day," and he had kavana during the day where his hands are going. Stam yadayim shniyos. Stam means if you're not having kavana, if it's not stam yadayim, if you're being mindful where your hands are going, and you make a stipulation. Why do you have to make the stipulation? That's the topic, but that's how it works. Then ein matrichen olav bein harbaim, you don't have to wash your hands before you have a meal later, even in the afternoon. And because of that, we see that Rabbi Abino, who had mafaket lachamari, he had donkey drivers. Donkey drivers means they made a business transporting produce or stuff from here to there. Travelers then had a limitation with water. There's no water. The challenge of the chamarim were, where do they wash their hands at night? Many of them, they camped on the side of the roads. They didn't have water. So that was the solution. Solution was, Han da atun mashkichin mistechaim, where you're going. The first time you find water, could be you'll find water to wash your hands for your breakfast at 8 a.m. Could be you'll find it at 12 p.m. But the first time, at least chapanayin for the rest of the day. So nasvin yedechin, wash your hands. But now, to prevent the agmas nefesh, or the hunger for later, umasne, make a stipulation. Now, of course, it doesn't work for when you sleep, because when you're sleeping, your hands are touching, and you don't know where they're going. But when you are awake, umasne kol yoimam. And therefore, since it was harder for people that travel to find water, that was the solution. That was a lachatchila solution. And again, this is all based on what we have been learning, that even the mappa, like use a mappa, it's better. Netilas yadayim mappa is a b'diavad. This is lachatchila. Wash your hands. You make a stipulation. It's for the whole day. You keep your mind where your hands are. Make sure you don't touch anything that's dirty, and you're good. Says the Gemara. Rab Ze'eda, Solik Gabi Rababo Likeisar. Now, just to say like this, that the Gemara Brachas Bavli Daf Mem Vav relates that Rab Ze'eda was once deathly ill, and Rababo told the Oibishter that if you're going to heal Rab Ze'era, I'm going to make for him a Suda Soidah. He found an opportunity, not only, and Rab Ze'era had a refuah shalem, that was a nes, and he wanted Rab Ze'era to be there. So that's what we're talking about. So when Rab Ze'era was going to Rabbi Bo to celebrate really his Suda Soidah that was being made by Rabbi Bo. Ashkechei, guys, we're going to skip the parentheses. Amar Neze Lemechel. When did he get there? Bashgacha Pratis. And also, it sounds like it's not like Rabbi Bo was waiting for him. When he walked in, boom, then Rabbi Bo was telling the Oilam, it was probably the whole city was there. Could have been there was thousands of people. Let's go have a meal celebrating Rab Ze'era. So Yahavle Igula de Katsei. Igula, interesting expression, is a loaf of bread. It was round. We only have a loaf for Shabbos. Why? Because in the Beis Hamikdash, there were 12 loaves of bread that was changed every Shabbos, the lechem upon them. And the letter Vav has the numerical value of 6. That's why our breads for Shabbos are elongated. They're like a Vav shape. Normally breads are round, and that's the Igula. The Katsi means, the Charedim says, he gave him the Igula that's going to be cut. In other words, he was Machabed, Rab Ze'era, we're having a meal. The whole meal is to celebrate you make the Hamoitz. Amalei, and he tells him when he gave him the Igula the cuts. He gave him the bread that will be cut. He tells him, Sav Berich, you make the Hamoitz. So Amalei, Rab Ze'era responded that there is a rule that Dafka the Balabai should be the one making Hamoitzi. Why? Look at the beautiful expression, because Balabais Yudeya Koichoy Shel Kikar. The Balabais recognizes his loaf's potential, which means the Charedim says like this. The Bavli says in Daf Memvav that you have to, and we know this, whoever's cutting the bread, if you think about the psychology, if you're the guest, healthy people, when they give from their own. It's no chachma to give from someone else's. I can go to Vlad's house, take out his $500 mashke and give out. No, the Balabayas is the one that when he cuts his bread, I meant that as a compliment. In other words, I didn't mean that. I mean to say is that a Balabas, he knows what he has. And a Balabas, by nature, when you invite people, you're generous. I know they're stingy people, but normal health people are generous. A guest cannot be generous the way the Balabas. It's not right. So if the guest will be the one, whoever makes Hamaisa will be the one cutting the bread. The one who's cutting the bread, think of how big of a loaf, how big the guest feels inhibited. I'm not going to be a mensch of Yanam's cheshbon. And the Balabas, the opposite. The Balabas wants to give everyone more bread. So it only makes sense that the Balabai should be the one cutting the bread. That's a rule. And that was the honest. In other words, Rab Ze'era was honored, but he tells him that do as the Balabas, you have to make the Hamoitz. And whoever makes the Hamoitz is the one cutting the bread. Now, he accepted that. That's a rule. But min the achlul, now that they finish eating, at least he's going to be Machabed Rab Ze'era with benching. So Amarle, Sav Bereich, please take a cup and lead us in Birchas HaMazon. So now Rab Ze'era says, I can't anymore. Why is that? Because Chachem l'Rav Huna and Nosharabo, my great master, the Chacham Rav Huna, and he's saying this because he didn't want Rabbi Bo to debate this. No, it's the first statement that the Balabai should be the ones he knows the koyach of his bread that was accepted. Here he's making a statement that you'll see Lav Dafka is correct. There's a pushback, and who Avu Amar, the great that Rav Huna says, the one who opens is the one that closes. I know that in the world out there, some people are good openers and some people are good closers. Some people are not closers. But in the Torah world, right? Some people, they can't close a deal. They know how to open up and they can't close. Some people, they don't know how to open. If you bring them in, they're too aggressive, they lose it. Lahavdil, here we're saying, no, the one that opens should be the ones that closes. And that's very important. In other words, you close the doors that you opened. In the negative is you sleep in the bed that you made. This is in the positive. You opened, you close. Can't you open and someone else close? Doesn't work that way. In other words, Ein Bereda, you have to, the Babo, you're going to have to lead the bench. So the Gemara, and the fact that he needed to speak about the author, he didn't just say B'Shem Omer, he spoke accolades. Wow, Rav Huna is an Asher Rabba. Taka, the Gemara is saying, hold on, that's not correct. Masnisa, I have a Braisa that apparently disagrees with Rav Huna, which in other words, Rav Huna cannot disagree with the Braisa. That's a kasha understatement. Now, the Brisa doesn't say anything explicit, but it's a presumption, like many Gemaras. The Tani we learned in the Brisa. Seder Netilas Yadayim. And this is something also very relevant. Seder Netilas Yadayim is that on one hand, we want to be machabed the gadol, however you define the gadol. On the other hand, when it comes to Netilas Yadayim, being that the normal thing is to wait, you have to wait for everyone to wash their hands. If the gadol is going to wash first, then he's going to end up sitting like a goylem waiting for a prolonged amount of time until everyone else washes. So how do you balance these two things? You want to give him covet. One covet is you wash first. The other covet is you should wait the least. So that's competing. So what do you do? So that's the Seder. At Chamisha, up until and including 5 people, Maschilim and Agadol, Taka, you're Machabah the God. If there's 5 people washing and he's the first one, he has to wait for 4 more. Seder, not the end of the world. But that's the cutoff line. Yoisen Mikan, if it's more than 5, then Maschilin Minakotan. Then we begin Minakotan. Why? Like the Charedim says, the first widest line. Now I think that Maschilin Minakotan then would mean once he's not the first, I think he should be the last. I think. Because if he's not the first, then he shouldn't wait at all. However, Be'emtza Hamazon, what's this Be'emtza Hamazon? So people used to wash their hands being tafshel or tafshel. That's reshus. It's not an obligation. It's also connected to our sugya. They didn't have cutlery. So you ate the one food, your hands got soiled. So certain people would wash their hands. Dear, you're not making a bracha afterwards. Since you're not making a bracha, so then Be'emtza Hamazon, Maslan and Agad. Because you're not, if the gadol washes first, he doesn't have to wait for anyone. You're not waiting for anyone. You're washing your hands and you're eating weiter. Lachar is my machroinim. Now, on one hand, there's no kibbut by my machroinim. In other words, it's not the who, but there was something else. That maschal min ha'mavarech. The mavarech should be the one. Now, let me ask you a question. You're being mechabed the mavarech. What about him waiting for the next 10 people? And I want to tell you something else, that if you speak after you washed my machrenim before you bench, you have to wash my machrenim again. That's the halach. And so the presumed reason. Because if you're talking, you might be eating, and the food is there. I don't know. Figure out the reason. So 1 second. Why do we always maschal min ha'mavarech? Why don't we also say covered? If it's more than 5, let someone else do it. So the presumed answer is because they didn't have Sidurim. The Mavarech needs time to be Mesader, Birchas Hamazon, and Ased. We want to give him that time. Adarab. The more people, the more time he has to get focused on what he has to say Ba'al Peh. Now comes the bomb question. If Rav Huna Rabbo is right, that what? That so the guy that washed Hamoisi already knew the whole meal that he's going to be Choisem. He already had time to prepare for benching. If you only discover by benching you're going to be the bencher, it makes sense. That's the presumption. Now says the Gemara, why don't we care about him waiting? Is it not? Because now he just found out he's benching, give him time. Let there be 20 people who washes my machlenim. But in Tamar, if you will say, which is what Rav Huna and Nosha Rabba says, that then kfar mesukanu. How great is that? No, it's a signal for him to prepare. He doesn't need the signal. He's prepared already. So l'chayda the Brisa, say that until Sidaim shows that we don't accept Rav Huna Rabba. Our answer is daf, pay aleph from the base. No, you got the whole thing wrong. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, he's right. Period. However, what happens? What happens if, and that's the case of the Brisa, Tiftoid explained the Brisa only the Elaine in the scenario, the Hava Olin, that people entered the Su'uda, kitin, they entered a little bit at a time, which means if I would have had 10 people washing together, that's, by the way, their taka, the cotton begins. 5 people washing together, the gadol begins. What happens if I washed for me? Then you came and you washed for you. Then you washed for you. Because when we were opening the meal, no one made hamoitzi for no one else. Now we're sitting and having a meal together. Now we're going to bench together. Now that we're going to bench together, there was no poiseach. There is where the Brisa says that you give the guy who's going to lead the benching, Mayim Achreinim, no matter how many people have to wash after him, because now he needs the signal to get ready to bench. But in a scenario where people washed at the same time, and as we learned in the previous chapter, that's not just about washing at the same time, but you're eating together. You're being mesav. Like we learned in the Charedim. Guys, let's eat together. The Balabais is eating amongst them. However, all these rules work. In other words, whenever you would have someone who makes the bracha for everyone else, in that scenario, you know this guy is going to be leading the benching according to our sugya. And in that case, by my machleinim, he doesn't have to be the first one. The way I understand that, l'chura, same logic. Maybe for 5, that after a certain number, the one who you're being machabe, part of the kibbutz is for him to wait the least. Let's read it inside again. So you don't know who's going to bench because there was no one that made hamoitzi for anyone else. That's the case of the Braiso. Make my machleinim. That's what we're learning. Yeah, we're not learning. He should be. That's what Danny. That's exactly what we're learning. No. That's not what it says in Allah. One second, we're not learning Shulchan Aruch, but that's what we're learning today. Correct. And we learned. And another thing to point out that what we're learning today, don't put it on the same madrega. The first rule that we learned that the balabai should make hamoitzi because he'll cut ba'ayin yafa. That is something that you see today. Go to people's houses. You're not machaber other people with hamoitzi. If anything, by other groups, they give the wife to make hamoitzi. It's the balabai. It's the same concept. It's the same concept because for equality, what's called DIU, DUI, driving under the influence. I don't know what that is. Okay, yeah, but it's a balabais. I'm not saying this to criticize. In other words, by the way, it's a good thing to be machabed your wife, or you're machabed her. She's machabed you. She's the balabasta. She's being machabed you. Doesn't matter how you look at it. The least stingy of the couple should be the ones cutting the bread. Some people, they give bread, they should eat less meat. So maybe, I don't know however it works today. Then the Ikar Su'udah was bread. Then the question, who should give out the steak? Who should cut up the roast? Now we give the benching, we give it to a kohen, we give it to the Talmud Chacham. Yeah, is not something that I'm familiar with, but that was what, it looks almost like Rabbi Zajac didn't want to be invited. I don't know, looks like he was like maybe walking out of that. In other words, they made a meal for him and he didn't go there invited. He happened to come there. Interesting story. There's something here. Sounds like they didn't want to hear, but the question is, why not? Don't forget, no. This false humility, that's our illnesses. They were normal people. There's no mitzvah to get covered, but it's very important not to have, let's say, what's it called? It's called disciple syndrome. In other words, don't make yourself little when you're not little. Rabbi Zajac was the giant. Rabbi Zajac had a nest. You made a Su'udah Seidah for him. Yeah. There's a reason behind it. It's not what you said. I don't want to take it. That comes from a certain dysfunction. They were functional people. We're going to the presumption that were tzaddikim, which they were, and there was something why he didn't want. But the way he quoted from the Funar and Asherabo. Okay. Anyways, guys, moving on to the next mission. We're going to learn the Mishnah now the way we learned it in the Bavli. Let's see how far we can get. There's no rush. The beauty is the time. We have a lot of time. And then we're going to show how the Yerushalmi foundationally argues with the Bavli. What are we talking about? This Mishnah is speaking about, we're going on the Seder of Su'udah. You washed your hands, you dried your hands on a mop. Let's review a couple of rules that we learned when we began the Sugya Friday of Tumantara that the Gabbai loves. The first rule that we repeated from the Shmoyne Oised Dvarim, Shagaz Rabbi Balias, Hananya ben Chizkiah ben Garin, is that anything that has the capacity to passel truma, which means even a sheni cannot make chulin. We don't paskin like Rabbi Kiva. We learned that in Pesach. Rabbi Kiva holds chulin can become a shlishi. We don't follow that. Anything that has the capacity to passel truma, which is something that's tamid level sheni, makes mashkin hilul. If it touches mashkin, the mashkin is any one of the 7 liquids. The simon, the mnemonic is yad, shachat, dam. The last mem is mayim, makes the mayim into a rishon. A rishon, another rule, even though a rishon mid oiraisa be metama adam and kalim, mid oiraisa only an av can be metama adam kalim and oichlon mashkin, making them into a rishon. An av can make things into a rishon. Midoiraisa or Rishon could be metama chulin oichlin or mashkin, certainly truma and kachim, but Rishon cannot be metama adam and kelim. The other gezeda that they made is that even something that's only a Rishon can be metama kelim, but then we learned all the details that if the contact was mala achoirav, it's only metama the keli mela achoirav, as a reminder that it's only a tumah. If it had contact with truma or kachim, you're not going to burn it, you're only going to do toil. Okay. Now, we also learned the third din was that stam yadayim askonis, so they made a takana yadayim ashnius. And therefore, like we said, srach truma, not only kohanim when they eat truma, kohanim when they eat chulin, and then in extension, even all of us, I'm not a kohen, you're not a kohen, for those who are not kohanim, whenever you have at least a meal, even though we learned today different opinions, all for the kohanim, all when they're going to go back to eating truma, everyone washes their hands. And if not, you're dayim arshnias. Okay, so now let's walk this through. You wash your hands for natilas yadayim. You have now a cloth that could be wet. That will be a big thing. Now, another thing about wet, there is a minimum amount of wettedness that it needs to have, moisture. We're going to get into that tomorrow. There won't be enough time to get that far into it. But just remember that. But if it's wet enough, then there's mashkin. I'm going to go right now by heart, the way the Bavli learns. The Bavli learns that there's a machloikes between Bishama and Basilil that's not spoken out in the Mishnah, but that's the premise of the way it approaches the Mishnah, whether you are allowed to use a table that's tummy. Beishamai holds that you can't even eat on a tummy table. Basilil holds you could eat on a tummy table. Now let me tell you why. Why would Basilil say you can eat on a tummy table? Because we're speaking about a table that if it's tummy on a level of a rishon. And it's not going to touch. You'll be careful. If the table is tummy, you won't allow it to touch your food. But it's zicher will not make your hands tummy. What we are preventing is for you to wash them zivlos yadayim, and then for you to undo it by your hands becoming gesheni again. Since Basilil holds that there's no problem eating on a tummy table, Basilil holds, this is what I'm saying now, is dafka, not the Yerushalmi. Basilil holds the way the Babli understands it, even though it's not written explicitly in the Mishnah, that when you wash your hands from natilas yadayim, don't put the towel on the table. Why would people want to put the towel on the table? We also learned this in today's Daf Pei Aleph, because people would get their hands soiled. We learned certain people had a minig, bein tafshel or tafshel, they would wash their hands. Rav, even though he had natilas yadayim, he put on a gloves, he put on a mappa. There was no cutlery. People didn't want to soil their hands. So when they did so, what do you do today? You have a napkin. People do it now. Your hands get soiled with cutlery, you clean it. So what was Basilil's fear? What was Basilil's fear? Since Basilil is lenient, holding that you can use a tummy table, if you're going to put the mappa that you use for natilas yadayim on the table, you would put it there to have it near you if you have to clean your hands from the Moroccan fish. The gefilte fish doesn't make your hands dirty, but Lenny's Moroccan fish is so juicy and everything, your hands will become dirty. Then you want to have chicken, you want to have meat, you can't do that. So Basilil says, Gavaldik, you can't put it on the table. Why? Because since Basilil holds you can use a tummy table, the table is only tummy, even if it touches mashkin, because of this rabbinic law, it will make the mashkin what? Arishan. And then when you'll clean your hands on the mappa, your hands will become asheni, you under the natilas yadayim. Beishamai, who's machmer, who holds, he's machmer. You can't eat on the tummy table. So now he'll have a leniency. Now there's nothing to worry about. You can put the map on the table. The tables, you're not allowed to use a tummy table. I want to open up the Mishnah. Yeah, mamish. Okay, but what I'm saying now is not, we have enough time, even without making you crazy. That's not the way the Yerushalmi learns it. I'll read inside the Mishnah. Look at these words, beautiful. That after you wash your hands on the mappa, we're speaking about the cloth that you use to dry your hands from the natilas yadayim. Beishamai says, you can put it on the table. Now, it understands the Bavli, Basilil argues with this. In 2 lines, we're going to see that the Yerushalmi holds, Basilil agrees with this. I'll explain this in a moment. But first of all, Beishamai says you put it on the table, Lebavli, and Basilil says you can't put it on the table. Why? Because like we explained, because Basilil is lenient, because he allows us to eat on a tummy table. Now, Basilil oimrim, where do you put it? You put it on the kesses. They would have cushions, right? Like when you have now the haseva that you have on the seder. Not only are we uncomfortable leaning to make it more uncomfortable, that acherus, they give you a pillow. You ever try that? That's almost common. Put a pillow, you don't know. So they would have a pillow. On the pillow, you can put it. Now, let's leave it ready for tomorrow. One thing is clear. Beis Shammai does not allow you to put it on the kesses. That's clear. It's that there's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The way the Bavli learns, there's a double machlokes. There's a machlokes whether you can put it on the table or not. Beis Shammai, yes. Beis Hillel, not. And then there's another machlokes. Could you put it on the kesses? Beis Hillel says yes, and Beis Shammai says not. Kesses, we'll leave for tomorrow. We'll leave it for tomorrow. I just want to open up. Oh, no, don't close. This is very gishmak. Even I can finish a minute early. Remember what I said. Now, let's begin the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi opens up by making it clear. That's why they wrote it this way. They knew that other people learned it otherwise, and it's recorded in the Bavli later. The Yerushalmi came 150 years early. But the Gemara wants to open up by making it clear that there is only one machlokes. Beis Hillel, Avad allows you to put it on the table. Beis Hillel is so lenient, not only can you put the map on the table, you can even put it on the kesses. Let's read it inside. It means Dafka not like the Bavli. Masnisa says the Gemara Yerushalmi is Beis Hillel holds you can put it on the table. Now the kasha is, let's speak out. The premise of the Bavli is not wrong. The Bavli holds emes, that Beis Hillel holds emes, that you can use a tummy table. So if you can use a tummy table, think about it. So why taka can you put it on the table? The answer is because most tables that people would use then to eat are not shayach to be tummy. Why not? Masnisa is b'shulchana either shal shayish. Shayish means marble, and as the Haredim points out, shayish doesn't even have to mean a pure solid rock. Even if it's only shayish coated, even if it's only coated with stone, a clay evan is not mekabel tuma. And even if it was not made out of stone, even if it was made out of wood or out of metal, most of the tables were shalparakim. They were made out of detachable parts, without getting into the details, and therefore they were not shayach to become tamei. She'ena mekabel tuma. Very good. And as the Haredim points out, hold on, why didn't at least the Yerushalmi speak out? Well, depends. If your table is a table that's makabel tamei, let Beis Hillel say you can. So he says no. That I'm reading v'loy tiksha liflik b'shulchan gufei be'makabel tuma le'ena makabel tuma, inside the middle of the Haredim. The yesh leimer the roiv shulchan shalahen. That's the difference between Yerushalmi and Babel. See, that's the difference. See, in Babel, they would use different tables. Their tables, many of them were shayach to becoming tamei. That's why they needed to understand different. In Eretz Yisrael, at least in the northern part of Eretz Yisrael, the vast majority of the tables was either shal shayish or shal perakim, and therefore v'diber b'hoiva. When they were having a debate, they were only speaking about the relevant. It was never an issue whether the table is tamei or not. We want to make that clear. Okay. Yes, yeah, the Haredim says. Now, okay, 7 o'clock, we'll stop over here. At least we got it good enough. Now we'll have to explain the Yerushalmi's understanding of the machlokes. Let me go, I'll tell you even more than that. Why would a shulchan made out of wood be mekabel tumah? It's pshutei klayetz. I want to, so Elamites made lekabel. It's made lekabel. If anything is something that goes apart, it's not mekabel tumah. Azoi, that's the din of Hilchas. It's not a keli. Even when it's a keli, it's not a keli. All right.